Hey guys, tonight we're easing our way into the wooden sandals of an off-duty samurai, a man who can split a melon with surgical precision, but spends most of his free time trimming bonsai trees and composing moody poems about falling leaves. The floor is cold beneath your feet, the air smells faintly of cedar and rice straw, and outside your paper door, the distant sound of a rooster is already declaring that, yes, the sun has returned, and no, you don't get to sleep in. You sit upright on a thin futon. Your back cracks with a little too much drama for someone supposedly trained in endurance. Around you, the faint shadows of early dawn spill across the woven tatami mats. Everything feels measured here. Even the way the sunlight stretches across the room seems to obey a centuries-old code of conduct. You rub your eyes and remember you're not late for war, you're late for breakfast tea, which in this era might be more dangerous. This is a quiet, orderly day in Tokugawa, Japan, sometime in the mid-1600s. There's no urgent call to arms, no invading clan to repel, just the slow drip of a routine that's as meticulous as your sword technique. You probably won't survive this kind of structure if you're used to snoozing your alarms 15 times. But here honor demands early rising, and your master once claimed sleeping past sunrise dulls both blade and brain. You're not sure about the science, but you do know he once hit a wasp mid-flight with a chopstick, so you tend not to argue. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time down in the comments. I love seeing where you all are drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first step in your morning is not rushing. Rushing is for peasants late to the fields or for horses startled by arrows. You're a samurai, graceful, deliberate, and slightly sore from yesterday's jujutsu demonstration. Your movements follow a rhythm almost like choreography as you slip out of your bedding folded, with the reverence usually reserved for sacred scrolls, and shuffle toward the edge of the room. The wooden floor beneath you creaks just slightly. Your house is made of wood paper and thatched roof, which is both charming and entirely uninsulated. In winter, your breath fogs in front of you. In summer, it's hotter inside than a blacksmith's forge. But today it's spring, cool, quiet, and filled with the scent of plum blossoms drifting in from a nearby courtyard. It's the kind of morning that inspires haiku, or at least a sarcastic mental note about pollen-induced sneezing fits. You sit cross-legged, knees cracking in protest, and begin your breathing exercises. Not for any grand mystical purpose, though the scrolls say it aligns your chi, but mostly because it's too early to talk, and your stomach is already composing angry poetry of its own. You count each breath like it's a stepping stone across a shallow river. Inhale, exhale. The samurai mind is a calm pond, and you're trying very hard not to splash. Outside, the sounds of the day begin to bloom. A servant sweeps gravel with a bamboo broom. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks. And the neighbor's rooster, already smug from waking you up, announces again that it exists and is in fact superior to all other birds. Historians still argue whether rooster ownership was a status symbol or a low-level punishment. You move to the sliding door and push it open with both hands. The shoji panels glide like silk, revealing the garden you raked last week into an agonizingly perfect spiral. Not a single footprint has disturbed it either, because of respect or because the moss guardian you carved from a gnarled stump has genuinely frightened your household into submission. There is tea waiting for you. Not because someone brewed it, you don't have that many servants, but because you left water to steep in a kettle last night, and it now smells like bitter toast and responsibility. You pour it slowly into a shallow cup, watching the steam rise like a morning ghost. You sip, and yes, it's slightly overbrewed, but you tell yourself it builds character. There's no breakfast buffet here, no pancakes, no scrambled eggs. You'll likely eat a small bowl of rice, maybe some pickled radish, and a slice of fish so thin it qualifies more as a suggestion than a meal. But for now, it's just you tea and the knowledge that you won't be swinging a sword today, not unless the cat knocks over the ink pot again. You pull a thin, worn robe over your shoulders. It smells faintly of sandalwood and weather. On its sleeves, a faded crest, the mon reminds you of your clan, your heritage, and that time you accidentally wore it inside out to a shrine ceremony. That earned you 3 weeks of etiquette training and exactly zero forgiveness from your sensei. From across the garden, you hear someone begin to chant. It's low, rhythmic, probably your neighbor again, who insists on rehearsing his sutras aloud, despite having the vocal range of a sleepy toad. But it's comforting in its own strange way. Part of the rhythm of the morning, like the tapping of wooden sandals against the stone path, like the distant creak of bamboo in the wind, like the slight groan of your knees as you prepare to stretch. Because, yes, stretching is part of the routine, not flashy, not epic, just small shoulder rolls, ankle circles, and a few painful lunges that make you question your past life choices. But flexibility is important, especially if you want to avoid being defeated by your own hamstrings during an ambush or worse, a tea ceremony. You finally finish the tea. The cup is empty, the garden still undisturbed, and the rooster mercifully has stopped. You rise slowly, remembering the next task of the day. Not combat, not calligraphy. It's the bath, and you're already dreading the temperature. You shuffle toward the bathhouse with the same reverence you might give to a shrine, except this shrine is dedicated to cedarwood steam and the subtle humiliation of communal nudity. You slide open the door and a soft fog rolls out like it's trying to escape the responsibility of being so thoroughly serene. Inside the bath is exactly what you expect: a deep wooden tub almost overflowing and a neat little stool beside a bucket for pre-wash rituals. You sigh. It's warm already. Someone's been generous enough to tend the fire below the tub this morning. Probably your apprentice or a helpful spirit. Either way, you make a mental note to leave some rice balls as thanks. You kneel on the stool and splash yourself with ladlefuls of water, not because you're dirty, but because the rules say so. Clean yourself before entering the clean water. That's the paradox. You scrub lightly with a cloth that's seen better days and smells faintly of pine and regret. There's no soap in the modern sense, just powdery ash and maybe a little rice bran if you're feeling decadent. The sensation is more symbolic than refreshing, but the ritual is everything. You're not washing away dirt. You're washing away yesterday. Once you're sufficiently scoured, you lower yourself into the bath, one careful limb at a time. The water embraces you like an old friend who's slightly too enthusiastic. It's hot. Not a that's relaxing hot no more. Like, please don't pass out before the third dunk hot. But you settle in slowly, sighing as your joints forgive you. and your muscles finally remember what relaxation feels like. Steam rises, it curls into the rafters and disappears through slatted vents, carrying away your lingering thoughts with it. You sink lower water up to your chin now. The cedar scent is heady, the wood creaking softly beneath you, like an old temple whispering secrets. If you close your eyes, you can almost forget the world outside your duties, your swords, the next stiff etiquette gathering where someone will inevitably misquote Confucius. Bathing for a samurai isn't just hygiene, it's philosophy. You're meant to contemplate, to clear your mind, to reflect, and in some cases to draft the beginnings of a death poem should the moment feel particularly poetic. Historians still argue whether samurai genuinely composed death poems in the tub, or whether that's just something romanticized in Edo period plays. But you can admit there's something nicely dramatic about staring at ripples and imagining your legacy. Your fingers begin to prune. Time to rise. You do so with deliberate grace, letting the water cascade off your arms and back, like you're modeling for a scroll painter who specializes in heroic dampness. You step out towel off with a cloth smaller than any modern person would find reasonable, and don your robe again, this time fresh and still warm from sitting near the bath fire. You tie the sash just tight enough to feel purposeful. Outside, the morning air greets your freshly steamed skin with a soft bite. It's a little too cold. You pretend not to mind. Honor demands it. You return to your room where a folded headband and small mirror wait. The mirror is polished metal, no glass here, and your reflection is slightly warped, which makes it easier to accept the fact that your hair is doing something wildly unsamurai-like today. You comb it anyway, with the patience of a monk and the occasional grunt of dismay. The top knot must sit just right, not too forward, not too tall. If it leans even a little, someone will comment. They'll smile politely, and then you'll be subjected to a 30-minute lecture on the spiritual balance of forehead presentation. Once your hair is subdued, you inspect the rest of yourself. Not for vanity, well, maybe a little, but because appearances are part of the samurai code. Clean, composed, precise, even when no one's watching, especially then. As you finish dressing, your thoughts drift. What will the day bring? No wars to fight, no messages from lords or land disputes to mediate, just time. And in a samurai's life, time can be either a luxury or a slow-motion duel with boredom. You step back onto the porch, still drying your hair with one hand, and catch sight of a dragonfly flitting across the garden. It hovers, pauses, then vanishes behind a cluster of irises. There's a superstition that dragonflies are messengers from the spirit world, or sometimes past warriors checking in on you. You nod at it just in case. In the distance, someone is playing a shakuhachi flute. The notes are slow melancholy, like the soundtrack to a particularly introspective moment in a kabuki play. It makes you want to write something, maybe a haiku. You're not very good at them, but that hasn't stopped you before. Steam curls from warm wood mirror, forgets who I am. Dragonfly departs. You nod pleased enough, then pretend you hadn't recited it aloud. You might be alone right now, but in a household like this, someone is always eavesdropping from behind a door, a screen, or a poorly trimmed pine. One last deep breath. The bath has done its work. You feel lighter, quieter, calmer. You step into your sandals, their straw soles pressing familiar patterns into your heels, and make your way toward the next quiet ritual of the day. No swords yet, no combat drills, just a fan, a few bows, and enough etiquette to make your brain ache in cursive. You ease open the paper screen that leads to the front garden, your sandals whispering across the polished wood like they're conspiring with the dust motes. Morning has fully arrived now. Sunlight slants across the raked pebbles of the courtyard in neat silvery bands, and the breeze smells faintly of pine needles and something pickled. Probably lunch being prepared. You're not hungry yet, but your stomach files the information away for later consideration. Today is a formal rest day, meaning of course it is laced with formality and only loosely defined as restful. Your Lord has declared that warriors should use such days to tend to the finer arts of being a person. So now you're about to enter the domain of bowing. Bowing, fanning, and social grace activities that involve no bloodshed and in their own strange way require more stamina than sparring. You move toward the reception hall where a small tea gathering is underway. Not the full tea ceremony. No, that's a few hours of poetic silence and exactly timed sips. This is more casual, a chance to greet visitors, engage in some practiced humility, and remind everyone that you're very competent at being calm. You kneel on the tatami mat, knees aching a bit despite your best efforts not to grimace. Across from you sits a minor court official whose name you never remember and who once famously bowed so low he knocked over a brazier. He's smiling now, clearly remembering the same thing. You return the smile. Neither of you mention it. That's etiquette. Your host arrives, a graceful man with a folding fan tucked neatly into his sash. He offers tea in bowls that are more sculpture than tableware, and you accept with the practiced hands of someone who's definitely dropped one before and never will again. The tea is bitter, grassy, and oddly comforting. It tastes like melted spring. A conversation begins. Carefully. Everything is measured pace tone, deference. You know how this works. You compliment the weather. You pretend you understand poetry references you absolutely do not. You make an insightful comment about the way the garden's stones echo the impermanence of existence. You receive a nod. Victory. Etiquette for the samurai is a form of martial art in itself. You train your facial expressions. You train your posture. You train how not to react when someone makes a thinly veiled insult about your family's recent decline in rice tax yield. Historians still argue whether this intense ritualism originated from a desire to keep the peace, or whether it was just a way for bored lords to remind each other who had the finest lacquerware. The folding fan comes out. You're handed one as well. This is the next act. You both unfold your fans slowly, deliberately, as though unlocking an ancient seal. Then you begin the slow, performative fanning of the face. Not to cool down, of course. You're not even warm. This is about grace, about subtlety, about who looks most like an illustrated scroll of seasonal manners. You hold the fan in your right hand, flick it open with just enough snap to show confidence, then place it gently against your shoulder. The other man mirrors you. It's not a duel, not quite, but if fans were swords, you'd be evenly matched. There's a small shared chuckle about someone's recent clumsy attempt at incense appreciation. You laugh politely, remembering how the room had filled with choking fog, and someone claimed it reminded them of Mount Fuji at dawn. You'd nearly choked on your rice. Etiquette extends even to laughter. Too loud and you seem vulgar. too soft, and you seem uninterested. The middle path is hard to walk, especially when someone's telling a story about how their cat disrupted a Zen rock garden, and it's actually quite funny. Eventually, the gathering dissolves. One by one, the guests bow, fold their fans, sip their final tea, and vanish like mist. You remain seated for a moment longer, allowing your back to ache quietly, while you pretend to appreciate a scroll painting of a carp leaping over a waterfall. The scroll is meant to symbolize perseverance. You wonder if the carp ever just gave up and took a nap at the bottom of the stream. Rising slowly, you bow to the host. He bows back. You bow again, so does he. You pause, not sure if one more would tip the balance into absurdity, then settle for a polite half nod and make your way toward the exit. Outside again, the breeze catches your sleeve, tugging gently like a reminder. There's still time in the day for less performative pastimes, maybe a bit of calligraphy, or even a game of Go if someone's around to challenge you. Or maybe you'll just sit for a while and listen to the wind chimes tinkling over the doorframe. They don't care whether your posture is good. You stroll slowly along the walkway, pausing at the koi pond. The fish rise lazily to the surface, hopeful for food, only to find disappointment and the reflection of a slightly oversteeped samurai looking down at them. You imagine they judge you. You bow slightly to the largest one just in case. He turns unimpressed and glides away with the indifference of an aging poet. Quirky too, how even in your off hours, you find yourself rehearsing. A slight draw of the fan, a deliberate fold of the sleeve. You wonder if the koi ever do something silly just because no one's watching. But then again, maybe you do too. You did try writing a haiku after the bath after all. With a long sigh, you head back toward the inner quarters. Time to switch out of your formal robe. You've been holding your stomach in for almost an hour, and frankly, you deserve a medal. You swap the stiff, ceremonial robe for something looser, simpler, and far less inclined to make your shoulders feel like you've been carrying a shrine. The fabric is light soft from wear and smells faintly of cedar stored as it was, in a chest lined with aromatic shavings. Freedom, thy name is loungewear. You stretch arms, reaching up toward the paper ceiling joints, popping in quiet protest. It's around midday now, and your brain is beginning to shift away from pleasantries and towards something a little more strategic, a little more mischievous. Time perhaps for one of the samurai's quieter passions games. Not war games, not Go or Shogi, though those are certainly worthy contenders. No, you're headed towards something even older and even less productive, Kamari. Yes, ancient rule-light Japanese soccer, with robes. You make your way toward the garden court where a few others are already gathered, bouncing a deerskin ball high into the air, with their feet, thighs, shoulders, and yes, the occasional desperate chin. There are no goals, no teams, and no real winning, just the shared stubborn commitment to keep the ball from touching the ground. You join the circle, a nod. A gentle tap sends the ball your way. You respond with a careful upward kick, sending it lazily back into the drift. It's not graceful, but it's not embarrassing either. That's the sweet spot. Historians still argue whether Kamari was more of a sport or a meditative ritual, or possibly just a clever excuse for high-ranking officials to show off their silk robes and coordinated footwear. You suppose it doesn't really matter. What matters is the satisfying thump of leather, the shuffle of feet on gravel, and the mild panic when someone lets the ball drop and everyone collectively groans like it's the end of the world. At one point, the ball ricochets off someone's back and lands squarely in the koi pond. A beat of silence, then laughter. Even the koi seem mildly amused, though as always that might just be your imagination giving them too much personality. One of the older players bows theatrically to the pond, retrieves the ball with a bamboo scoop, and announces that it's now doubly blessed and should be kicked with even more reverence. Everyone agrees, reverently. You return to the game shoes, slightly damp spirit lifted. After the match, if you can call it that, you settle beneath a maple tree with another samurai. He's older than you by a few decades and once allegedly fought off bandits using only an umbrella and an angry expression. Now he uses his umbrella mostly to swat away flies. He opens a pouch and offers you something sweet dried persimmons dusted with sugar. They're chewy like ambition. You accept one and nod. This is a quieter moment, one not taught in the manuals. Sitting in the shade watching others take your place in the circle, the sound of the ball like a heartbeat against the lazy backdrop of cicadas. The conversation turns to gossip. Samurai gossip, mind you, which is about as juicy as boiled millet, but twice as layered. Did you hear Lord So-and-so bought a third warhorse? Did you know Lady What's-Her-Name has been seen reading Chinese poetry without a translator? Scandalous. You nod thoughtfully, contributing the occasional indeed or quite bold of her, and let your mind drift. There's a growing sense that downtime among samurai is not so much relaxation as it is gentle rehearsal, a way to refine yourself at a quieter volume. Even Kamari becomes a metaphor, don't drop the ball. Not socially, not emotionally, and definitely not in front of Lord Takeda, who has the memory of an elephant and a fan sharp enough to slice pickles. Later in the afternoon, you try your hand at incense blending. You head inside to a small side chamber lit by soft daylight through rice paper and a few flickering candles that probably weren't meant to be flickering, but are anyway thanks to a draft no one has the heart to correct. The tools are already laid out, tiny boxes of aromatic woods, powdered herbs, and delicate ceramic dishes shaped like lotus flowers. You kneel, you inhale, you begin. Kodo, the way of fragrance, isn't just about smelling nice things. It's a full-body experience. You mix sandalwood clove and a mysterious ingredient labeled only as plum memory, which smells like dried fruit nostalgia and maybe the back of a shrine. You burn a pinch. You waft the scent toward your face. You try not to sneeze. Across the room, someone coughs dramatically. Too much clove, they whisper, and then bow because even passive-aggressive critique must be respectful. You nod and add a dash of something labeled autumn dusk. It smells better, more melancholy. Historians still debate whether these olfactory rituals had spiritual significance or were just really elaborate ways to show off how much money someone had to spend on rare bark. Either way, your nose is officially overwhelmed and your eyes are watering slightly, but you've made a blend that smells almost like a memory you can't quite name. You label it soft regret and tuck the dish away. You emerge into the garden again just as the sun begins its gentle descent. The air is golden. You feel mildly productive, which in samurai terms is probably the same as contentment. No poetry yet, but that's okay. There's always tomorrow. You wake the next morning not to the clash of swords or a servant's urgent knock, but to birdsong, polite, persistent birdsong, like they're auditioning for a nature documentary that only you get to hear. The light slides through the paper walls and soft sheets, and you lie there a moment longer than usual, pondering whether to rise like a disciplined warrior or roll over like a decadent poet. You rise eventually. Honor is persistent like that. After a simple breakfast of rice miso and pickled plums, the kind that make your face scrunch and your ancestors nod approvingly, you find yourself in a small garden shed where something quite unwarrior-like is happening. Pottery, not just any pottery, delicate, sometimes wonky, usually asymmetrical bowls and cups molded with the careful inattention that only true devotion can produce. You've heard it said that samurai who worked with clay were either seeking spiritual calm or avoiding paperwork. You relate to both motivations deeply. Your fingers sink into the wet earth. The wheel spins. You try to center the clay and your thoughts at the same time. Neither listens particularly well. The bowl begins to wobble, tilting like a drunk umbrella in a thunderstorm, but you keep going. Imperfection is part of the aesthetic, you remind yourself. That's not failure, it's wabi-sabi. Historians still argue whether samurai pottery was more about meditative discipline or just something to gift their overlords to avoid paying taxes. Either way, your bowl is, well, it exists. You set it aside with the hopeful reverence of someone pretending their lopsided creation has character. It does. So much character, it could probably run for local office. The kiln is already heating its belly, glowing like a small domestic dragon. You place your piece inside, nodding to the fire as if to say, "Do your best, old friend." It replies by belching heat into your face. Next on the agenda, falconry. Now this might sound glamorous. You picture yourself standing on a hillside, wind tousling your hair falcon, perched regally on your arm like a living exclamation point. The reality, however, involves waiting. A lot of waiting and wearing a very specific glove that smells permanently like bird. You meet your handler, an older samurai whose falcon has been trained to respond to the phrase, "Make them reconsider," which frankly is terrifying. He hands you the bird gently as if passing along a crown made of talons and suspicion. The falcon eyes you with what can only be described as ancient judgment. You walk out to the practice field where wooden dummies and fluttering targets have been set up to simulate enemies, although most of them look like scarecrows with commitment issues. The handler signals and your bird launches, pure precision in feathered form. It soars, strikes, returns. You feel a little like royalty, or possibly a Bond villain. You try your own call. The falcon looks at you, then it looks away. It might be ignoring you. It might be deciding whether you're worth the effort. You're not sure. You try again, slightly more desperate. Finally, it returns reluctantly, like it's doing you a favor. Back at the aviary, you feed it something you pretend not to identify and receive in return a moment of stillness. One blink. Approval. Maybe. Samurai falconry, historians say, serve both as elite entertainment and a subtle performance of power. If your bird could outhunt the others clearly, your household was disciplined, elegant, and terrifying in equal measure. Some even bred falcons to match the color of their family crests, which probably impressed no one except the birds who were likely just hungry. After falconry comes something slightly less majestic: laundry. Even samurai, it turns out, needed clean underthings. You join a few others near the river's edge, sleeves rolled up, kimono, tied high, wooden tubs ready. There's a rhythm to it: splash, scrub, slap the cloth on a flat rock, repeat. The conversation drifts from politics to whether or not the local udon shop is secretly watering down their broth. A hawk screeches somewhere overhead, probably judging your laundry technique. One older retainer tells you that in his youth he trained under a daimyo who believed laundry was a test of character. If your whites were truly white, you were morally sound. You point out that your whites are now an experimental shade of beige. He nods sagely. Ah, wisdom. Historians still argue whether the everyday chores of samurai life laundry, cooking, repairing armor, were considered vital acts of discipline or just the result of not having enough servants. Probably both. You wring out your sleeve and wonder how rice gets so sticky even after a full soak. By midday, your arms are sore, your pottery is still cooling in the kiln, and your bird-related dignity is somewhere in the grass behind you. You feel oddly fulfilled. You retreat to a shady corner with a bamboo mat, a straw pillow, and a small cup of barley tea. The kind of moment where the breeze matters more than the news. A cricket chirps. Someone hums a folk tune off key. The world exhales. In this quiet, you remember that rest isn't idleness. It's the Sabbath of the soul. Even a warrior needs time to stare at clouds and wonder if that one looks like a castle or a teapot. Spoiler, it's both. You sip your tea. You think about your slightly lopsided bowl, your very judgmental bird, and your not quite white robes flapping in the wind like sleepy flags of peace. And you smile. The sun begins its slow tilt westward, casting long shadows through the bamboo fence behind the garden. You're leaning on a rake you haven't used in 20 minutes, staring thoughtfully at a patch of moss, like it just insulted your honor. Welcome to the unspoken art form known as samurai landscaping. It's not the landscaping, no roaring mowers or decorative flamingos here. Instead, it's raked stones and an obsessive relationship with gravel placement. Every ripple in the sand, every bend of a pine branch is part of a larger picture meant to represent stillness, contemplation, and the idea that you can control at least one tiny corner of a chaotic world. You comb the pebbles carefully, imagining waves lapping at an invisible shore. Historians still argue whether samurai adopted this practice as a Zen exercise or because staring at rocks was cheaper than therapy. Either way, you rake with the determined solemnity of someone who once yelled at a shrub for growing unevenly. And when your pattern's just right, only then do you step back and immediately see the footprint you didn't mean to leave behind. You sigh and start over. Next to the garden is a wooden structure, simple, unadorned, just slightly too elegant to call a shack. Inside is where you and a few others take part in the only club that could make poetry seem like a mosh pit: incense appreciation. Yes, incense appreciation. You sit on tatami mats in a circle. A small burner passes from one person to the next, a wisp of smoke curling into the dim light. You close your eyes, take in a delicate breath. Sandalwood. Number may be aloes wood harvested from some legendary forest where trees whisper ancient secrets and taxes are optional. The host asks what the scent reminds you of. You answer honestly, walking through wet leaves on the morning after a duel. They nod. Someone else says it smells like lost letters. Someone else says fresh ink. One guy says it smells like debt. Everyone agrees. The practice is called kodo, the way of incense, and it's part art, part meditation, part sensory detective game. There are rules. You don't smell the incense, you listen to it. which makes no sense and also complete sense at the same time, like jazz. There's even a game called Genji Ko where you try to identify which scents are the same and which are different based on patterns from the tale of Genji. It's basically samurai scratch and sniff meets literary trivia. Historians still argue whether it was a refined pastime or just an excuse to show off your nose. After a few rounds of olfactory introspection, your head feels light and clear. Like you've spent time in a place where time slows and breath becomes the main event. You exit the incense chamber and hear a distant clang metal on wood, rhythmic and deliberate. You follow the sound to a quiet training hall where a few off-duty samurai are practicing the long-lost martial art of fan combat. Yes, fan combat, Tessenjutsu. You try not to laugh because the guy holding the iron-ribbed fan is staring holes through a straw dummy with the intensity of someone auditioning for a noir film. The fan flicks open with a dramatic snap. He charges, striking the dummy with a force that could probably knock over a sturdy table or seriously offend someone's mother. Turns out Tessin or war fans were real weapons. Some were disguised as harmless accessories, perfect for court intrigue or quick defense in places where swords were banned. Historians still argue whether the use of fans in duels was common practice or just the kind of story samurai told to impress first dates. You're handed one. It's heavier than expected solid cold. You practice a few swipes, half expecting it to burst into confetti. It doesn't. It just makes a soft whoosh followed by a dull thwack as you knock a practiced dummy's head clean off its peg. Everyone claps politely. You bow. It feels weirdly empowering to weaponize something usually reserved for sweaty nobles and overly dramatic court ladies. You imagine stopping a thief in the marketplace by whipping open your fan and saying something cool like, "Not today." Then you trip slightly on the tatami mat and remember humility. Evening nears. The day begins to wrap itself in golden shadow. You make your way to the main hall where someone set out an enormous game board and several trays of black and white stones. Time for Go. Now, Go isn't just a game, it's a full-blown mental siege. Strategy, foresight, and the ability to pretend you're not panicking as your opponent casually takes over half the board. You sit cross-legged, trying to recall what your instructor once said. Control the corners, then the sides, then the heart. You immediately lose control of the corners. The game stretches into a quiet duel of glances, minor sighs, and pretending you meant to sacrifice that group of stones. Historians still argue whether Go was purely strategic training or an elaborate excuse to sit still and judge people. Your opponent, an older samurai with a face like folded parchment, wins by exactly 3 stones. He doesn't gloat. He just offers you tea and says, "Better luck next time, cloud mind." You're not sure if that's an insult or a compliment. Either way, you drink the tea. The sky is dark now. Lanterns flicker to life, their paper skins glowing with gentle orange light. Somewhere a flute plays a song you don't recognize but that you somehow remember. Maybe from a childhood dream, maybe from someone else's. The fan is folded neatly beside you. The incense lingers in your clothes. The rake lies in the gravel, its last ripple catching moonlight like a secret path. You take a long breath and the world holds still. The air outside is soft, now cooling, as the stars blink lazily into view, as if unsure whether they really want to witness another samurai tea gathering. But here you are, padding across wooden floorboards, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps toward the tea room. Yes, the tea ceremony, You've seen it before, probably thought it was just glorified beverage prep. But tonight you notice the rhythm, the way the host bows just a little longer than expected, the way the utensils are cleaned with the precision of a neurosurgeon performing a very tiny, very sacred operation. You kneel, spine straight, legs slowly going numb. The host ladles water from a steaming iron pot with the grace of someone who's definitely practiced this more than swordplay. The scoop enters the tea bowl, spins gently, and the matcha is whisked into a smooth emerald cloud. You sip. It tastes like moss if moss had gone to finishing school. Touch annoy you. The way of tea isn't about drinking, it's about noticing. How the steam curls, how the tatami smells after years of absorbing quiet, how the sound of hot water pouring into ceramic mimics distant rain. Historians still argue whether this ritual was more spiritual retreat or social theater, but either way, it offers you a moment of silence dressed up in ritual. Your mind wanders back to earlier that day when you caught someone meditating in a tree. Yes, in the tree. Legs crossed back, straight eyes closed, balanced on a branch like a sleepy eagle. Well, apparently tree meditation is a real thing among the more eccentric samurai. Perched high above the courtyard, they believe the altitude aids clarity, or at least makes it harder for people to interrupt them. One particularly well-known tree meditator once claimed he could hear the thoughts of moss. Everyone nodded solemnly. You suspect they just didn't want to argue with a guy sitting 10 feet in the air holding a sword. This quirkiness extends into less vertical hobbies too, like netsuke carving. You're handed one a tiny intricate toggle made from ivory or wood no larger than your thumb. It depicts a frog playing a flute. You try not to smile. It's adorable and ridiculous and somehow still perfectly dignified. These were often used to secure pouches to belts, but many samurai carved them just for fun or to give as gifts with secret meanings. You take a seat beside a lacquered box of carving tools and begin your first attempt. It's supposed to be a tiger. It ends up looking like a confused raccoon with anger issues. You show it to someone. They squint and say, "Ah, the spirit of inner turmoil." You nod sagely. Carving, much like Go or the tea ceremony, was a quiet rebellion against noise. A gentle way of proving that not everything needed to be solved with a blade, or words, or even symmetry. Later after dinner, simple grilled fish, pickled radish and rice so fluffy it seems to apologize for existing. You're led to a room bathed in dim lantern light. A storyteller sits cross-legged holding a fan and wearing a grin that promises mischief. He begins spinning tales, not war stories, nothing glorious. Just oddball samurai moments, the man who tried to duel a monkey because it stole his hat. The Ronin who opened a noodle stand and accidentally started a fashion trend. The young warrior who mistook a tanuki for a ghost and screamed so loudly he lost all credibility for a decade. You laugh quietly with the others. There's something special about these small stories like cracks in the stoic facade reminders that samurai were well people. People who stubbed toes got food poisoning, cried during moon viewing festivals. Historians still argue whether this sort of humorous oral tradition was common or just tolerated in secret, but you suspect it was more important than the epic ballads. You remember them more, don't you? Not the names of generals, but the image of a warrior tiptoeing through a koi pond, trying not to wake the fish. After the stories, there's a brief moment where nobody moves. The silence stretches long and warm like a blanket just pulled from the sun. And then you hear it, the unmistakable clack of Gaeta sandals, slow and deliberate. Out in the courtyard, someone's practicing bugaku, an ancient court dance older than most buildings you've ever been inside. The movements are slow, geometric, like calligraphy done with a body. The dancer wears a crimson mask, half smile etched in gold leaf. Their arms glide out, then sweep down in a low arc. One foot pivots silently. You watch hypnotized, not by the dance itself, but by how completely unnecessary it seems and how beautiful that is. This isn't for war or power or survival. It's just for being, for filling time with grace instead of noise. Back inside, someone's unrolling a scroll. No, not a battle plan, but a weather diary. A samurai's meticulous notes about seasonal changes, from cloud patterns to frog chirps, to which plum trees bloomed early that year. You read an entry from 60 years ago. Today I observed a crow pretending to limp. Curious. That's it. That's the whole entry, and somehow it's perfect. You begin your own entry in a fresh notebook. Today I watched a dance so slow I think I fell asleep standing up. You underline it. Twice. The night deepens. Crickets begin their slow symphony. Someone pours warm sake into small cups, and you sip it slowly, feeling your shoulders sink just a little lower. You're not just relaxing, you're being gently dissolved. The sun is barely a thought on the horizon when you wake to the sound of what else, a bamboo water fountain tipping back and forth like it's trying to keep the beat of a very lazy metronome. You stretch bones popping like distant firecrackers and find yourself drawn outside to where a group of samurai are assembling not for war, but for flower arranging. Yes, Ikebana. You think you're about to witness something serene, maybe even a little boring, which, let's face it, is kind of the goal tonight. But this isn't just putting daisies in a vase. No, this is floral kung fu. There's silence first. A lot of it. The kind that makes you aware of every breath, every bird chirp, every regret about not wearing warmer socks. Then with intense focus, the lead samurai, let's call him Flower Shogun, selects a single willow branch and places it upright at a perfect diagonal. Another chooses a chrysanthemum and trims it down with a short blade, holding it like he's about to duel a daffodil. Historians still argue whether samurai practiced ikebana as part of spiritual training or just as an elite status flex. But either way, watching a room full of heavily armed warriors argue about the angle of a stem is oddly reassuring. You want to laugh, but you're also afraid someone will gently correct your laugh form with a swift floral adjustment to the ribs. Your own attempt starts poorly. You stab a rose too hard and it retaliates with a thorn to the thumb. Eventually, though, you find the rhythm breath snip place, step back, repeat. The final arrangement leans slightly to the left, like it's shy but trying its best. A samurai nods approvingly. Very asymmetrical, he murmurs. You beam. Later that morning, you stumble into a small courtyard filled with people practicing calligraphy. Not just words either. Some are painting single characters over and over, each one subtly different. One figure has written the character for wind 72 times each with a slightly different brushstroke, like trying to capture a breeze in ink. You're handed a brush. The bristles tickle your palm, the ink smells faintly of iron and damp stone, and you begin. Your first stroke is ambitious. Your second looks like a wounded duck. Your third may be abstract expressionism. A passing samurai nods with mild pity. Ah, you are of the free school style. You don't know what that means, but you accept it. The goal isn't perfection, it's presence. The way your hand feels. The sound of the brush whispering across rice paper. You lose track of time. You forget about the cold. You even forget your unfinished flower arrangement until someone gently places it beside your calligraphy, forming what they call a visual haiku. You call it a hot mess, but you're starting to get it. You follow a group to a forest path lined with stones and moss, so thick it looks like it's trying to crawl up your ankles. Someone mentions this is a philosopher's walk, a common route for samurai who preferred contemplating mortality to, you know, adding to it. One of them recites a haiku, "Still pond a dragonfly lands on my shadow." You nod as though you fully understand. In truth, you're still thinking about that dragonfly's career options. At the far end of the path, you find a strange sight, a samurai garden entirely dedicated to rocks. Just rocks. Some are large and jagged, others round and smooth, arranged so deliberately that you feel rude just stepping near them. This is Karasansui, dry landscape gardening. A place where mountains are stones, rivers are lines in the sand, and silence is the loudest sound. One older samurai is raking gravel in perfect concentric circles around a rock the size of a grumpy cat. You try to help. You rake one circle. It looks more like a sad cinnamon roll. He smiles and erases it without judgment. The circle must feel no effort, he says. You nod like you totally understood that and definitely didn't just trip over your own gaita sandals. And then just when you think it can't get more still, you're invited to observe a practice known as tsukimi, or moon viewing. Yes, really. You're going to sit and look at the moon. As night falls, lanterns are lit along a path, their light flickering on bamboo leaves. You're handed a small lacquered box containing rice dumplings. Why, no one says, but you eat one and it tastes like nostalgia dipped in sugar. Everyone sits. Silence. The moon climbs above the trees, enormous, round, so pale, it looks like a god left their tea saucer in the sky. A samurai next to you whispers, "You must view it as if it is the first and last moon you will ever see." You do, or at least you try. Mostly you think about dumplings, but also, yeah, it's kind of stunning. Historians still argue whether Tsukimi was more poetry than prayer, but either way it becomes one of those moments you don't need to explain. The moon doesn't care. It just glows. On the way back, someone hands you a flute. Just hands it to you. You make a sound that resembles a duck choking on seaweed. The group laughs, not unkindly. You try again. This time it's a slightly less distressed duck. Progress. Turns out many samurai were trained in music not to perform, but to appreciate, to attune their senses. One famous warrior reportedly refused to duel anyone who couldn't play at least one melancholic tune. Another would only write his will while listening to wind chimes. These were not men of half measures. You sit beneath a plum tree flute in your lap, gravel still clinging to your socks, moonlight tracing soft edges across your flower arrangement and crooked calligraphy. You sigh. Maybe samurai didn't just train for war. Maybe they trained for stillness too. Maybe that's the harder battle. And maybe, just maybe, your flower does look like a tiger if you squint hard enough. The next morning begins with a meal that's as much a meditation as it is sustenance. You find yourself seated on a low mat inside a lacquered wooden room the kind where you're afraid even blinking too loudly might offend the walls. A small tray is placed before you, containing a bowl of white rice, a piece of grilled fish barely the size of your thumb, pickled radish and miso soup so clear it's almost judgmental. A samurai bows and says itadakimasu before eating. You follow suit, though you're not entirely sure what you're about to consume. The pickled radish crunches like someone stepped on a snowflake, and the fish, well, let's just say it's not trying to impress you. The rice, though, that's where the magic is. Perfectly fluffy, warm, and calming, like it was steamed by a cloud having a good day. This is Shojin Ryori, a type of Zen Buddhist cuisine favored by monks and occasionally by off-duty samurai trying to realign their spirit and their intestines. Historians still argue whether it was adopted for its spiritual merit or because someone overdid it on sack the night before and needed a hard culinary reset. Either way, you find yourself slowly savoring each bite, chewing more than you ever thought morally necessary. Time slows. You actually taste things. Radical concept. After breakfast, you're invited to watch a ritual tea ceremony, chanoyum, and you're warned very politely not to treat it like your usual morning coffee and scroll routine. This is a deeply symbolic affair orchestrated like a ballet that also happens to contain hot beverages. You step into a tea room that feels like a shrine to stillness. Tatami mats muffle footsteps. A hanging scroll offers a seasonal phrase in calligraphy so elegant it makes your handwriting blush in shame. The host bows, then slowly, methodically begins preparing the matcha ladling water, whisking with a bamboo chasin and wiping the tea bowl with such reverence you suspect it might be the bowl's birthday. Each movement is intentional. There's no rushing, no multitasking, no just a quick pour, and the silence, it's thick enough to slice into minimalist origami cubes. You finally receive your cup. It's bright green, a little foamy, and smells like fresh leaves dreaming of summer. You sip. The taste is earthy, slightly bitter, deeply grounding. You feel like you could write a reflective novel or forgive someone who cut you off in traffic last week. It's said that tea ceremony allowed samurai to rehearse death in miniature, confronting silence, savoring each detail, and practicing graceful detachment. Or maybe it was just a much-needed break from stabbing things. Historians, as usual, still argue. Once you've recovered from your tea-induced enlightenment, you follow the group to a quiet training hall, not for swordplay this time, but for Kyudo, the art of Japanese archery. At first, this feels more in line with your expectations. Finally, something with a pointy object and distance involved. But no, even here, things are more spiritual than lethal. A row of archers kneel in meditative silence. Their bows, longer than they are tall, look like minimalist sculptures from a very intense museum. Each shot is a ritual, draw, breathe, release. The arrow flies in near silence, then thunks into a distant straw target with the kind of satisfying finality that makes your spine straighten involuntarily. When you're handed a bow, you realize how much heavier it is than you thought. You draw, you aim, you release. The arrow veers dramatically and lands in the grass, like it just gave up halfway through its job interview. A nearby archer offers a kind nod and says the target is just one part. You're not sure what the other parts are, but you nod like a wise student. Everyone here nods like that. It's a quiet conspiracy of pretending we all understand everything perfectly, Next comes something even stranger. You're taken to a dojo where two samurai are engaged in what looks at first glance like slow-motion wrestling. But then you realize they're practicing Aikido. No slamming, no aggression, just redirection and graceful counter movements. It's like watching someone turn a punch into an awkward hug and then into a gentle nap on the floor. You watch one practitioner effortlessly redirect his opponent's energy with a small twist of the wrist and a pivot of the hip. The other one lands on the mat like a leaf surrendering to gravity. There's no anger here, just physics and cooperation. It's martial arts for introverts. You try it, you fail, but you fail gently, which feels like an important first step. The philosophy behind Aikido isn't domination, but harmony. To meet violence with softness, to convert chaos into calm. You begin to wonder if the samurai weren't actually warriors so much as existential life coaches in elaborate robes. You're led next to a small shrine just outside of the dojo, where incense curls upward like it's climbing invisible stairs. One of the older samurai kneels, offers a bow, and places a piece of folded paper on the altar. You're told this is kami, or spirit offering. Sometimes it's to ancestors, sometimes to the gods, sometimes just to say thank you for surviving another Tuesday. As you kneel beside him, the scent of sandalwood drifts through the air, and you realize your knees have finally stopped hurting. Either you're spiritually elevated or just completely numb. A final surprise awaits storytelling. Not sword tales, not heroic sagas, but strange, dreamy Setsuwa stories, short folk tales filled with mischievous spirits, impossible coincidences, and the occasional talking tea kettle. These were the pulp fiction of the day, shared between classes and passed on like precious gossip. Tonight's tale features a samurai who loses a duel but becomes best friends with a fox spirit. Historians still argue whether this reflects real belief or just a deep love of weird allegories. Either way, you're captivated, especially by the part where the fox opens a noodle shop. You drift off against a bamboo post, listening to laughter, brushstrokes of wind, and the whispered retelling of a dream that might not be a story at all. You wake to the rustle of sandals and the soft sound of a broom whisking fallen cherry petals off a stone path. It's not even sunrise yet, but already the courtyard buzzes with the low hum of a samurai household stretching into motion. You shuffle out to find your host, let's call him Yoshitaka, already upright and dressed calmly, tending to a bonsai tree with the kind of intensity that would make a drill sergeant nervous. Bonsai, it turns out, isn't just for miniature tree enthusiasts with too much patience and not enough hobbies. For the samurai class, cultivating these tiny trees was an act of aesthetic control and meditative practice, a way to apply principles of strategy and balance to something that won't stab you back. The pruning, wiring, and watering were all metaphors for self-discipline. Historians still argue whether some samurai used it as a political statement or just like showing off at tea parties. Yoshitaka gestures for you to try. The shears are absurdly tiny. You hover, snip one leaf, and panic. Did you ruin the whole thing? Yoshitaka smiles, nods, and says, less is more. You're pretty sure that's either deep wisdom or a polite way of saying, please stop before you kill it. From there, it's off to the Nogakudo, the local no theater, because yes, even hardened warriors in feudal Japan enjoyed long, slow performances where masked actors whisper existential poetry while walking at the speed of tectonic plates. You're ushered into a simple wooden structure with perfect acoustics and zero back support. The audience sits in a silence so dense, you swear you can hear the pine grain of the floorboards creak with age. Tonight's play a ghost story, of course, a wandering spirit trapped between worlds asking questions like, who am I and why did I eat that eel before battle? Or at least that's how it feels. The actors move deliberately, their stylized masks and sweeping gestures drawing you in like a dream you're only half awake for. You're told that samurai often patronize No not just for leisure, but for reflection. The plays were rooted in Buddhist thought, especially Mujo, the impermanence of all things. After all, what better way to confront your mortality than a 2-hour play where the main character turns into a tree? When the show ends, nobody claps. Applause is for amateurs. Instead, everyone just sort of nods quietly, like, yes, that play did indeed occur, and shuffles out with great internalized reverence. You do the same pretending you understood at least 40% of what just happened. Back at Yoshitaka's estate, you're invited to look at his collection of Netsuke miniature carved toggles once used to secure small pouches to kimono sashes. They're the kind of thing you'd expect to find in a glass case at a museum with a sign that says, "Do not touch even mentally." These little carvings depict everything from frogs on turtles to demons doing laundry. Some are funny, some grotesque, some elegantly simple. You pick one up that looks like a reclining badger with a smug expression. Yoshitaka tells you it represents cunning and leisure, basically the raccoon of ancient Japanese philosophy. He explains that these carvings weren't just decorative. They were daily use items that doubled as personal charms, political statements, or inside jokes. One popular theme was the seven lucky gods, including Hote, the jolly sack-carrying deity, who, if he were around today, would absolutely run a wildly popular food truck. Historians still argue whether these Netsuke were genuine art or just elaborate status symbols. Probably both. The rest of the afternoon melts into a kind of peaceful drift. You join a few retainers for a game of Go the Ancient board game that looks deceptively simple but quickly becomes more mentally taxing than trying to explain cryptocurrency to a grandparent. The black and white stones are cool beneath your fingers, and the moves are slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. You lose spectacularly. Later, someone brings out Karuta cards matching poetry fragments that involve fast reflexes and good memory. It's basically samurai slapjack, and it turns out Yoshitaka has lightning-fast hands. You wonder if his poetry swatting skills are transferable to combat or if he just gets really competitive about ninth century verse. And then a surprise invitation falconry. The estate keeps a few trained birds regal and intense. A falconer shows you how to wear the glove, how to offer the lure, how to not make sudden moves that could result in permanent eyebrow rearrangement. The bird, a pale-eyed hawk with a gladiator's posture, takes off into the sky and circles like it's judging the worth of your soul. Falconry was a favored pastime of elite samurai, a display of control over nature of coordination between man and beast. There was elegance in the silent signal, the swoop of wings, the precise moment of capture. The samurai didn't just admire power, they admired graceful power, which explains why so many of them dressed like stylish curtains with armor. As evening sets in, you take part in a more grounded tradition garden raking. You're handed a wooden rake and shown the fine art of drawing wavy lines through carefully placed gravel. At first it feels ridiculous, like dusting a desert, but after a while it becomes soothing. The motion repetitive, the goal unclear but somehow satisfying. You rake a little spiral and feel vaguely smug. Then Yoshitaka re-rakes it with practiced ease. Okay, humbling. Garden design in samurai culture wasn't about lush greenery so much as the space between things, the void, the silence, the composition of rocks. Historians still argue whether this was a reflection of Zen philosophy or just an excuse to avoid mowing lawns. As the light fades and paper lanterns begin to glow like sleepy fireflies, you feel something strange. Not peace exactly, but permission to be still, to breathe, to take a moment that doesn't need to be filled with anything. That night, over a simple meal and a shared bottle of sake that tastes like warm stone and ancient plum trees, you ask Yoshitaka what he does when he's not fighting training, raking, or pruning. He thinks for a long time. Then he says, "Listen to the wind," and you believe him. The next day greets you with mist. Not a dramatic, fog-choked battlefield kind of mist, but a soft, sleepy veil curling around the rooftops and pine boughs like it's tucking in the entire countryside for one more hour. You step outside and feel the dew cling to your sleeves. Everything smells of moss, wood smoke, and the kind of damp hush that tells you not to speak too loudly. Yoshitaka, your soft-spoken host, is already seated beneath a wide eave, gently plucking the strings of a biwa, a short-necked lute once favored by court musicians and melancholic wanderers. You recognize the tune vaguely, though it might just be your imagination humming along. He nods and invites you to sit. The music drips slowly through the morning like tea falling from the lip of a kettle, each note lingering longer than seems reasonable. It's not unusual for samurai to have played musical instruments, especially those with cultural ambition. The biwa, the koto, even the occasional shakuhachi bamboo flute all found their way into samurai estates. Not because these warriors dreamed of pop stardom, but because mastering an instrument was another form of inner discipline. Also, let's be honest, nothing earns you respect in a tatami room quite like playing a sad tune with deadly precision. Historians still argue whether this love of music was deeply spiritual or just a nobleman's attempt to impress guests during rainy weekends. Either way you listen, and the sound settles something in you. Yoshitaka stops playing and hands you the instrument. You pluck a string. It buzzes. The note is disobedient. You both laugh quietly. Apparently, it's the attempt that matters more than the performance. How very samurai. Later, you find yourself peering over a short bamboo fence at something unexpected: bees. Samurai kept bees. Yes, though not in tidy wooden boxes like a suburban gardener. These hives are made of hollowed-out logs, stacked and bound with straw rope. The bees hum gently as if also practicing their morning zazen. A servant explains that this is hachimitsu, wild honey harvested in spring and used in everything from sweets to medicine to emergency morale boosts during cold marches. Samurai weren't above sweetness, it seems, especially when paired with bitter tea or long silences. You're handed a sliver of rice cake brushed with honey and ginger. It tastes like sunshine disguised as medicine. You eat three. From honey, the day shifts toward heavier matters. Not battle, but bureaucracy. Yes, even the most refined warrior must eventually face that ancient, soul-draining specter paperwork. You're led into a low building where samurai scribes, notaries, and estate managers are hunched over scrolls and inkstones. The room smells like dust and effort. One man is calculating land taxes, another is recording rice yields, a third is cataloging horse fodder distribution, which, let's be honest, is a phrase you didn't expect to encounter today. Yoshitaka joins them and begins writing with the kind of quiet focus you now recognize as the default samurai setting. He's not doodling swords or poems, he's drawing boundary maps for a neighboring village dispute. Apparently, even the noble sword-wielding class had to deal with neighborly disagreements over irrigation channels and fishing rights. Historians still argue whether these administrative duties dulled the warrior spirit or refined it. But judging by the tension in this room, it's clear that managing a feudal estate required as much tactical thinking as a battlefield, just with more ink stains and fewer decapitations. You're handed a brush and a practice sheet of kana. The strokes wobble like frightened ants, but the scribe next to you smiles kindly. Form reflects mind, he says, which you suspect is a polite way of diagnosing your current level of inner chaos. You flee the paperwork sanctuary as soon as it's polite, only to be pulled into something far more lively, a cooking lesson. In the side kitchens of the estate, the retainers are preparing mochi sticky rice cakes pounded into submission by two people with wildly different job descriptions. One person smashes the rice with a wooden mallet the size of your leg. The other flips and wets it between strikes with terrifying timing. It's a performance equal parts culinary and trustful exercise. One mistimed swing, and someone's going home with a noodle for a hand. Samurai didn't always cook, but many of them supervised feasts, designed menus, or developed an appreciation for food as seasonal art. There's a ritual to what's eaten, when, and how. This month's specialty, cherry blossom rice balls and plum wine. You get to try pounding the mochi. Your mallet swing is enthusiastic but offbeat. The helper barely dodges in time. Everyone laughs. You apologize with excessive bows. Someone hands you a finished mochi filled with red bean paste, and the warm, chewy texture dissolves your embarrassment instantly. Food, it turns out, is the most effective diplomacy. As the day unfolds, you're invited to help with another distinctly off-duty task, preparing offerings for the local shrine. It's not elaborate, just rice, salt, and sake placed on a low table beneath a pine tree with a bell to ring for the kami. You kneel and bow. The wind stirs the branches. Something about it feels honest. Samurai were often deeply spiritual, mixing Shinto and Buddhist practices with daily life. They might meditate one day, perform purification rites the next, then visit a local shrine to ask the gods for favorable weather or a peaceful dream. Not because they were superstitious, though many were, but because they believed the invisible world shaped the visible one. That evening, as the stars begin their slow shimmer above the thatched rooftops, Yoshitaka brings out something unexpected, a kaseru, a long metal smoking pipe. He packs it with finely shredded tobacco, a habit imported through Dutch and Portuguese traders, and quickly adopted by samurai looking for one more thing to do pensively on a porch. He lights it, takes a slow puff, then passes it. You decline, but the gesture is appreciated. For many samurai, smoking was about pacing, another contemplative ritual, not a party trick. A way to end the day slowly, like a period at the end of a long poem. You sit in silence watching the cherry blossoms fall in ones and twos. You think about bees and paperwork, about ghosts and rice balls, about the fact that none of this feels particularly off-duty, and yet it's exactly that. Because being a samurai on a day off isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing everything differently. The next morning arrives with an awkward surprise laundry day. You'd assume samurai armor just cleaned itself, that it absorbed the scent of glory and repelled mud through sheer historical gravitas. But no, turns out all those silk underlayers, padded tunics, and linen wraps need regular care. And since there's no Tide Pod in 17th century Japan, that care involves an actual stream, actual rocks, and an alarming amount of slapping fabric against things. You trudge down with the household attendants toward the water's edge, carrying bundles of garments bundled inside larger garments. The stream gurgles like it's laughing at you, and in fairness, it should be. You attempt to scrub a pair of sleeves using a flat stone and a bar of pine-scented soap. It smells nice, but your technique is unhinged. A local boy glances over and wordlessly hands you a wooden washing paddle. Samurai didn't wash their own clothes every day, of course, but on certain off-duty weeks, especially when traveling or during smaller festivals, even high-ranking warriors found themselves helping out. Think of it as martial arts for laundry. The folds must be precise, the knots tight, the drying process monitored like a duel with humidity. As you lay garments on sun-warmed stones to dry, someone begins humming, then another joins in. Soon the air is filled with a quiet chain of melody, one of those work songs meant to distract from the fact that your back is killing you. You hum along off-key and no one minds. Back at the estate, there's more than just drawing happening. Today is calligraphy practice, though it's less about perfect kanji and more about shodo, the way of writing. Yoshitaka lays out thick brushes, inkstones, and crisp washi paper as solemn as a general preparing a battlefield. You sit beside him and watch as he grinds ink from a solid stick into a shallow pool, moving with the same calm rhythm you'd expect in sword drawing. The connection isn't accidental. Both arts demand breath control, posture, and intent. One just produces poetry, the other blood. Ideally, not both at once. You try your hand again. This time your brush doesn't rebel quite so hard. You write a phrase you heard yesterday. The wind does not compete with the pine. Yoshitaka reads it, nods thoughtfully, and adjusts one of your strokes. Better, he murmurs. Still unbalanced, but better. Historians still argue whether calligraphy was meant to reveal a samurai's soul or simply another cultural checkbox right after No's tea ceremony and owns at least one unread sutra. Either way, it has your focus now. Later, you're pulled into something even more unexpected: falconry. Yes, apparently on their days off, samurai didn't just sit around contemplating metaphors, they trained literal birds of prey. A young page leads you to a bamboo grove, where two men are adjusting the leather hoods on sleek, golden-eyed hawks. One bird turns its head and stares at you like it already knows you lack the hand-eye coordination required for this bonding ritual. You're handed a heavy glove and instructed to extend your arm. The bird hops on. You feel the talons carefully dulled, but still assertive and the weight of centuries. Falconry wasn't just a noble pastime. It was a demonstration of harmony between warrior and nature. Also, it looked incredibly cool. They release one hawk and you watch it glide across the treetops before swooping low in search of prey. It doesn't catch anything but still returns to its handler, with all the aloof pride of a cat who almost knocked over your mug but didn't. Historians still argue whether samurai falconry had any practical benefit beyond pageantry, but the sheer beauty of the practice, the silent flutter, the curve of feathered wings, the mutual trust between hand and hunter is hard to ignore. By midday, your falcon encounter is replaced by something more grounded: sandal maintenance. Yes, samurai had sandal problems too. Warji, the straw sandals tied around the foot with crisscrossed cords, were notoriously prone to wear. Every few days, they'd need retying, patching, or rebuilding entirely. You're taught how to thread the rice straw fibers and shape them around a mold of your foot. It's fiddly and slow. You poke your finger multiple times and end up with what looks like a woven tortilla. One retainer nods encouragingly, passable for a child, which is almost praise. This kind of slow, quiet work reminds you that samurai weren't always slicing through bamboo for fun. They sat, they mended, they made sure they had sandals for the next temple visit or march or moonlit stroll, where someone might suddenly ask them to recite waka poetry. In the late afternoon, you're drawn into yet another surprise: the archery court. This isn't battlefield archery. No flaming arrows or galloping horses. This is Kyudo, the Weo the Bo, a martial art of stillness and breath. The targets are set at ritual distances, and the bows, called yumi, are over 2 meters tall and asymmetrical, like someone tried to build a weapon and accidentally made a musical instrument instead. You watch Yoshitaka step forward. His every move, from planting his feet to releasing the string, is timed to breathe and posture. When the arrow thunks into the center of the straw target, no one cheers. There is only silence, and then a soft exhale, as if the Buddha man and the universe just had a quiet agreement. You try it next. The bow is unwieldy and deeply committed to revealing your flaws. Your arrow flies sideways. You hear a polite cough from the assistant. Strong spirit, but perhaps less elbow. You laugh, everyone bows, even mistakes are sacred here. As dusk arrives, a low drum beat sounds from the courtyard. Not for war, not for theater, but for stretching. Apparently, some samurai practiced early forms of body training movements that blended balance, strength, and breathing. Think proto-yoga with more shouting. You join a short session led by a senior retainer whose flexibility puts yours to shame. He bends, you creak; he exhales, you wheeze. And yet by the end, something in you has shifted. Your shoulders are looser, your mind is quieter. You didn't even know your ankles had tension, and now they've released a tiny sob. As you bow at the close of practice, the man nods. A day of motion is a day of peace. You think of falcons, sandals, and sideways arrows, and you're starting to believe he's right. By now, you've adjusted mostly to the strange, serene rhythm of samurai downtime. But this morning throws another unexpected curveball: gardening. You step outside expecting sword drills or perhaps a dramatic tea duel, and instead find Yoshitaka and several attendants kneeling beside a small landscaped area pruning moss. Not plants, not trees, moss with tweezers. It's not some punishment or Zen prank. This is Kare Sansui, the dry landscape garden, a miniature cosmos crafted from gravel rock and strategically placed tufts of green. You're handed your own pair of wooden tweezers and gently invited to participate in refining the stillness. The act of grooming moss and raking gravel isn't a metaphor, it is the thing. The careful arrangement of asymmetry, The chosen quietness, the space between objects, all meant to evoke oceans, islands, mountains. Not physically, but in the way dreams imply something deeper. Yoshitaka gestures toward a particularly grumpy-looking stone. That's Mount Hiei. It just looks like a rock, but okay. Samurai gardens weren't about food. They were statements of stillness, cultivated control. Historians still argue whether warriors truly internalized the Zen meanings behind them or just liked how good moss looked with their armor and paintings. Either way, the raking continues. Your line swirls, then breaks. Then you fix it. And oddly, it's calming, like ironing a brain wrinkle. Later, you follow a winding path to a back pavilion where a koto, a 13-stringed instrument, rests across polished tatami. You're invited to sit. The room is open to a breeze and someone sets down a tray of sliced pickled radish and roasted barley tea. Apparently, music is next on the unspoken samurai itinerary. A middle-aged woman, likely a music tutor, sits and plucks the koto with deliberate grace. The sound is soft shimmering like rainfall in a memory you're not sure is yours. The tune is ancient, probably older than the building. Then it's your turn. You kneel awkwardly and the tutor gently places your hands on the strings. It's not about playing songs, she explains. It's about listening as you play, like meditating with sound instead of silence. Your first few attempts sound like a startled toad falling downstairs, but eventually you find a pattern. The soft tap of fingers, the resonance in wood, the hush between notes. Yoshitaka passes by and gives a faint nod. Better than your archery, he says. Music and combat may seem like opposites, but for the samurai, they're both disciplines. Both require balance, rhythm, restraint. The bow and the koto share more than you'd guess. Afternoon brings yet another unexpected tradition, incense appreciation. Yes, samurai sniffed things recreationally, but in a classy way. Inside a shaded tea house, a few retainers sit in a circle. Before them is a lacquered box containing or aromatic woods, some of them imported, some as old as dynasties. A small coal is prepared in a ceramic burner, and the wood is gently placed to release its scent without burning fully. This is koto, the way of incense. Not just smelling for fun, but listening to fragrance. Participants describe the scents in poetic terms: plum rain at night or a fox under chrysanthemum fog. You offer something like kind of like a warm library and maybe a little noodle-ish, which earns a polite smile. Historians still debate whether koto was just a status game, who could own the rarest woods, or a true sensory art form. Either way, it's clear everyone takes it very seriously. A wrong guess in a scent game doesn't earn mockery, just a bow and the suggestion that perhaps next time your spirit will be calmer. Next on the roster of unlikely samurai hobbies board games, you're shown a small table with an elegant go board, 19 squares by 19, covered in black and white stones. A young warrior explains the rules with such intensity you suspect there's honor at stake. The game begins. You place stones. He places stones. It's quiet warfare, a struggle for territory using only shape and balance. Your brain fries around turn 30. The game ends with your loss, but your opponent smiles. You make chaotic shapes. That is interesting. Some samurai preferred shogi, a precursor to chess, involving captured pieces that could switch sides, a grim little metaphor if there ever was one. But Go remained a favorite, perhaps because of how deceptively slow it was, like real war, or calligraphy, or life. Evening descends with the smell of grilled eel from the kitchens. You follow the scent toward dinner, stomach growling. You're half expecting something hyper-ritualized, but tonight's meal is informal rice, miso small fish, and something you can't identify but eat anyway. During dinner, the household storyteller arrives, an elderly man with a gravel voice and eyebrows like angry clouds. He spins tales between bites of pickled plum, myths of wandering monks who outdueled demons using umbrellas, love stories between fox spirits and lonely samurai, and one absolutely bonkers anecdote about a drunken warlord who outlawed cabbage for being too suspiciously round. You're not sure how much is real, but everyone listens. Even Yoshitaka, who laughs at one twist so hard he nearly spits tea. Historians still argue whether these oral traditions preserved real local histories or were just 16th century Netflix. Probably both. Probably neither. As the stories fade into the clink of bowls being cleared, you feel a warmth beyond digestion. Samurai life wasn't just war or duty, it was slow games, tweezed moss, wrong incense guesses, and the sound of laughter beneath painted lanterns. You walk out under the stars. Somewhere a flute plays. Somewhere else someone's burning sandalwood. You take a breath. You don't win at Go. But maybe today that wasn't the point. Morning rolls in on padded feet, mist rising over the eaves like shy steam sunlight, creeping across the shoji as if afraid to wake anyone. You rise with that half-aware grace of someone who's forgotten whether they're a guest, a hostage, or simply too well-fed to care. Today you're told is calligraphy day. Oh yes, warrior monks and hardened fighters hunched lovingly over brush and ink, debating the curvature of a character. Seems silly until you're seated brush in hand and realize this is not handwriting, it's choreography. The ink smells metallic and vaguely ancient. It's made from soot and animal glue ground in a slow circle with water on a stone that probably predates every building you've slept in so far. You load your brush like you're about to perform surgery and begin your first stroke. Immediately you mess it up. A nearby attendant glances over, nods, and says, "Good. Start again." In calligraphy, failure isn't shameful. It's expected. The idea is that your brush reveals your spirit. A sloppy line, tense mind. A rushed stroke, impatient heart. Yoshitaka, somehow already on his fifth page, chuckles. My courage character looks like a flattened squirrel, he offers. But the ink feels honest today. Historians still argue whether samurai took this art form seriously or simply adopted it because the aristocracy did. Either way, it became part of their training, not just as performance but as mindfulness. To write kanji properly, your breath must slow. Your posture must anchor. You must, however, reluctantly chill out. You try again. The ink spreads too fast, but at least it curves this time. The character is patience. Fitting. Later, after your fifth attempt earns a grunt of approval, you're invited to visit the clan's private archives. Not the war maps or supply records, but poetry scrolls, weather logs, and dream journals kept by bored retainers across centuries. One scroll details cloud shapes from a particularly slow spring. Like a turtle admiring its reflection, one line reads, "Another cloud like a monk who forgot his hat." A samurai librarian, his robe soft and stained with tea, offers you one to read aloud. The room is so quiet, even your breath feels impolite. You read a haiku, something about frogs and dew, and though you don't quite understand it, something settles in your chest. Stillness, maybe, or just humidity. Next door, a different mood. You're beckoned into the dojo not for fighting, but for no theater practice. No, as in the slowest, most stylized acting in human history. You enter the rehearsal space and a masked performer is frozen mid-step arms, extended like a wind-up doll, paused halfway through a bow. The lead actor, an older samurai with the posture of a coat rack, explains that no is not about action. It's about the suggestion of emotion, a flick of a wrist, a trembling fan, a single turn of the head which somehow implies heartbreak, rain, and regret all at once. You try walking a single line across the stage and are immediately corrected. More like a ghost, someone says, less like you're dodging a puddle. Historians still argue whether no was used by samurai to internalize moral stories or just to entertain guests when duels were in short supply. Either way, standing on a stage in white tabi socks holding a fan, you barely know how to open, you feel oddly exposed and strangely powerful. Evening brings something livelier falconry. You're escorted to a nearby field where a retainer in lacquered armor holds a hawk on his wrist. The bird's eyes are furious little orbs, and its feathers ripple like tension made visible. This isn't just sport, it's status. Owning a falcon meant wealth, time, and access to land. Training one required patience, gentleness, and way more raw meat than you're comfortable seeing before dinner. They show you how to lure the hawk back with a glove and a tidbit of rabbit. You whistle. The hawk glares. Someone else whistles and the bird dives like a silent spear landing perfectly. You give up and offer the meat with both hands. There's a reverence in it, a recognition of power outside of swords or castles. Nature tamed, but only barely. Even samurai had to yield to certain hungers. The hawk eats without looking at you. That feels about right. After dusk, another surprise ink painting. You thought you were done with brushes, but this time it's looser mountains, trees, fog. You dab your brush onto rice paper, and it bleeds outward like a sigh. The goal isn't realism, they tell you. It's feeling. You're painting weather, not landscapes. Yoshitaka tries drawing a horse. It looks like a grumpy onion, but no one mocks him. He laughs first. This horse has deep trauma, he says. Even art can be a sparring match between ego and patience, precision, and imperfection. Your own painting looks like a sneeze. You name it Lonely Cliff. Someone claps. Probably out of pity, but it counts. The night closes with laughter around a fire pit. Someone breaks out a biwa, a lute-like instrument, and sings a bawdy song about a failed seduction involving pickled radish. You don't understand all the words, but the rhythm is clear, life is funny. So are samurai, especially off-duty. You lean back. Your brush-stained fingers rest on your lap. In the distance, a hawk cries once, then quiets. Another day of not being stabbed. You're getting the hang of this. It's early morning again. You wake to the smell of cedar smoke and roasted barley, which is, as you've come to learn, samurai breakfast for. You're lucky you're not at war. The air is cool, your joints slightly sore from last night's calligraphy posture, and the soft scuffle of sandals outside your door signals something new is afoot. Archery day. You shuffle out, belly half full of rice and miso soup, and find a group of warriors already lined up along the training yard bows, taller than most humans resting beside them like stoic companions. The yumi, as the traditional bow is called, is an asymmetrical thing, graceful, curved off-center, and definitely not designed for people with weak arms and a fear of bees. You're handed one and instantly feel like a pretzel being unbent. The bowstring hums when you pull it like a mosquito trapped in philosophy. Your target is a wooden post with a paper center about as big as a cantaloupe. You aim, you breathe, you fire. Your arrow arcs into a bush. Yoshitaka applauds with one hand. Excellent. You hit the concept of perseverance. You try again, closer this time. The instructor nods. Archery is the soul of discipline, he mutters. The goal is not the bullseye, it's the stillness between heartbeats. Historians still argue whether Kyudo, the way of the bow, was more spiritual than practical in its later stages. In earlier centuries, yes, it was battlefield gold. But as firearms came into play, bows remained as a samurai's inner mirror, a weapon aimed less at enemies, more at one's own distraction. You finally hit the target, barely, but the satisfying thwack makes you want to write a poem about it. Something simple like arrow paper sighs, "Hey, I did a thing." From there, your host suggests a change of pace. You've tried war, he says, now try peace in the form of incense. You don't mishear that. Soon you're seated in a dimly lit room, the sliding doors closed against the breeze, a faint trail of smoke curling from a tiny bronze censer. This is Kodo, the way of fragrance. It's basically smell-based meditation, and yes, it was an actual pastime among elite samurai. An elder with the eyebrows of someone who's been very patient for a very long time presents you with two different incense blends. You're to inhale, then describe the feeling, not the smell. You try. This one smells like autumn regrets. He nods, acceptable. The next one smells like burned oranges and nostalgia. You say nothing. He looks pleased. Sometimes silence is the correct response. You don't know if he's joking. It's too quiet to risk asking. Historians still debate how widespread Kodo was among warriors versus courtly elites, but records do show warlords investing serious time and coin into incense games. There were entire manuals on blending woods, judging aromas, and composing poetry based on the emotional resonance of smell. You guess when your career involves stabbing people, you start craving whatever's furthest from blood, like pine resin and regret. Midday rolls around and the schedule, yes, there's always a schedule, calls for horse grooming. You're not thrilled. Horses are majestic, yes, but also large and statistically impossible to predict. Yours greets you with a snort and a subtle threat to your shin. Still under the guidance of a very patient groom, you learn how to brush the mane, clean the hooves, and talk to the animal without sounding like a terrified court jester. The horse's name apparently is miso soup. You try not to take that personally. Turns out caring for your mount was a key part of samurai life. Not just practical, though war horses needed to be in top form, but almost sacred. Some clans believed their horses could sense spiritual energy, and at least one 16th century diary claims a horse refused to cross a bridge because its soul was unsettled. Yours just wants an apple. Later, you're shown the saddle collection. Each one is lacquered, inlaid with delicate motifs, waves, cranes, the occasional lightning bolt, because yes, your horse deserved flair. One saddle even has tiny bells sewn into the reins. For intimidation, no. For style. Samurai horses were fashion forward. By late afternoon, you're invited to help prepare tea, but not like let's brew some oolong and gossip. This is the tea. The real, deliberate, elegantly slow art of chanoyu, the Japanese tea ceremony. You step into a tea house barely big enough for 4 people. The walls are clay, the beams low. the light filtered through bamboo slats that paint stripes across your socks. Everything here feels like it was built for calm or for hiding from your responsibilities. Your tea teacher is a woman who moves like ink. Every gesture is silent controlled. You're handed a bamboo whisk and a bowl of powdered matcha that smells like the color green if it took a deep breath. She guides your hand. Your wrist is stiff. Your soul is chaotic. But you manage a whisk. Froth appears. You serve it. No one claps. That's fine. You sip. It's bitter and smooth like swallowing a forest that forgives you as it passes. Historians still argue whether tea ceremony was a daily practice for warriors or more of a retreat luxury, but the records show major generals hosting them between campaigns. Some even chose tea over sleep before battle. One daimyo allegedly delayed a siege because the tea had not yet cooled. No one argues with tea, not here. The day ends in the bathhouse. Of course it does. You strip down sink into a cedar tub and sigh so deeply it echoes. Someone nearby hums a folk tune. Miso soup neighs in the distance. And as your fingers wrinkle in the water, you realize the samurai didn't just master war. They mastered waiting for war. And in those gaps, they filled time with fragrance, froth feathers, and fans. It's absurd. It's beautiful. It's a lifestyle. Tomorrow, you're told, will include kite making and possibly melon carving. You nod. Of course it will. The sun rises again in tones of persimmon and pale rice paper, and you find yourself padding softly across a wooden walkway, wondering if today will be as charmingly strange as yesterday. Spoiler, it absolutely will. You're met by your guide who holds up two objects like a magician before a very sleepy audience. In one hand, a kite frame shaped like a dragon. In the other, a lacquered gourd containing ink and brushes. Today, he says, with a tone that suggests this is very serious business, we make joy take flight. It's kite-making day. Now, you might be thinking, aren't kites just for kids? But here in the samurai world, they are tools of art, skill, and on occasion, mild aerial espionage. Yes, at least one historical record claims a kite was used to deliver a secret message over castle walls. Historians still argue whether that actually worked or if it ended up tangled in someone's laundry. You begin by painting the rice paper, bold red curves for fire, elegant black strokes for wings. You're told each symbol must mean something, even if you're just really into abstract vibes. Then with glue and string, your kite becomes real, a flimsy miracle with delusions of grandeur. Soon you're outside on a grassy hill where the breeze smells like last night's cedar bath. You launch the kite. It flutters, wobbles, nosedives into a shrub. You try again. It catches, climbs, dances above the cherry trees. Success. Nearby, a samurai child cheers. You wave back, suddenly 10 years old again. It's disarming, this blend of warrior training and carefree play, but perhaps that's the point. After a break for pickled plums and roasted chestnuts, apparently the 16th century version of trail mix, you're ushered to a shady pavilion. A low table waits. Atop it, several odd-looking melons, a knife so sharp it probably dreams of haircuts, and a folded scroll titled Fruit Forms of the Five Elements. You are not ready. Your task, melon carving, apparently a noble pastime among high-ranking samurai, particularly those with an eye for aesthetics and zero patience for go playing. The idea is simple: turn your fruit into art. The execution, however, is like surgery for dessert. You attempt a crane. It becomes a lopsided turtle. No one laughs because in this culture, effort is noble and failure just an excuse to try again with a peach. Quirky fact, at least one daimyo had melon sculptures presented to guests as edible omens. One diary entry from the 1580s describes a banquet centerpiece shaped like a mountain god complete with sesame seed eyebrows. Scholars remain divided on whether that was impressive or deeply unappetizing. With your sticky hands washed and your dignity intact, you're led to a quiet hall, echoing and lined with wall scrolls. This is the dojo of silence, your guide whispers, a place for seated contemplation and the reading of moral fables. You're handed a short text, a tale of a samurai who gave up vengeance for the sake of plum blossoms. It reads like a bedtime story written by someone very concerned about sword-related karma. You listen as an elder recites another aloud. His voice is sandpaper and wind chimes. The story, a warrior who defeats a demon only to find the demon was his own reflection, metaphorically, of course, or not. Historians still argue whether such tales were metaphors or actual supernatural folklore taken at face value by 16th century readers. These fables are called setsuwa didactic, often strange and occasionally so slow-paced, you wonder if the goal is enlightenment or just a really long nap. Either way, they serve as a window into the samurai psyche, honor, restraint, self-reflection, and the occasional talking fish. Afterward, you're asked to write your own. You try. A sparrow challenges a monk to a snowball fight. The monk wins by smiling. Not bad. The elder nods. Outside, the sun is beginning to dip, and it's time for, yes, more fan dancing. You're not surprised anymore. The fan is a recurring character in your samurai week. Today's lesson involves synchronized movement, a kind of martial ballet set to flute music. You and 5 others step, turn, unfurl your fans in rhythm. If yesterday you danced for elegance, today you move for harmony. You learn that samurai sometimes practice these dances in pairs before duels, not as a warm-up, more like a psychological alignment. Two opponents moving in unison before clashing in chaos. It's poetic. It's mildly threatening. It's a kind of art warfare we don't talk about enough. There's one move called the falling petal. It requires you to drop your fan and bow simultaneously. You try. You misjudge the floor. Your fan bonks a student in the knee. She laughs. A true falling petal, she says. You both bow. Crisis averted. The final activity before dinner is utterly unexpected poetry riddles. Yes, riddles, but in verse. You sit in a semicircle as a senpai samurai, possibly the oldest person you've seen who still has perfect posture, reads a 4-line poem aloud. I am not water, yet I reflect the sky's face. I hold a mountain, but vanish when rain comes. Everyone stares into the middle distance like it holds all truth. You blurt out a mirror. The elder gives you a slow, approving nod. A rice bowl, actually. Right, sure. You try one. Beneath my hat no thoughts appear. I am the silence monks revere. Yet tap me once and I may sing. What am I? A few guesses: a bell, a cloud, a melon. One person suggests a samurai in love. You settle on that. It's the kind of game that makes time dissolve. That's the point. These weren't warriors obsessed with filling every moment with violence. They were on their best days artists of stillness, masters of subtlety, in love with leisure that taught them more than any sword. Dinner that night is grilled eggplant and soft tofu and miso. You eat slowly, it feels earned. As stars bloom above the compound, someone begins to hum again, a soft, low tune. You lie down on your tatami mat belly, warm mind slightly buzzing from too many melon haikus. Tomorrow you're told there will be fan painting and possibly beetle racing. But for now, just the chirp of crickets and the gentle thump of a forgotten kite brushing the rooftop tiles. You wake up to the sound of a beetle hitting a drum. No, seriously, someone, possibly the same person who thought melon carving should be a contact sport, has arranged a friendly insect race to begin your day. On a tiny lacquered stage with tiny flags and a surprisingly dramatic flute soundtrack, you're handed a glossy black stag beetle named Shingen after a famous warlord. You're also given a leaf and a small dropper of water. Apparently, hydration and motivation are key. Your opponent's beetle is named Lady Chrysanthemum, and she's already pacing like a prize fighter. The race begins. 6 inches of pure tension. Shingen lumbers. Chrysanthemum surges. You offer words of encouragement. Your beetle ignores you. In the end, it's a tie, but you pretend it's a profound lesson in balance. This bizarre event, you're told, is inspired by real Edo period pastimes. While beetle racing isn't officially documented as a major samurai ritual bug, collecting was absolutely a thing. Samurai and noble children would trap, train, and even bet on insects during summer festivals. Historians still argue whether this was a way to promote discipline or just a method of keeping rich kids from setting the garden on fire. With your six-legged champion retired to a slice of persimmon, you're off to your next task: fan painting. You settle cross-legged before a lacquered tray of pigments, vermilion, charcoal, gold. You're handed a delicate folding fan, blank as snow. Your guide instructs: paint not what you see, but what your spirit nearly remembers. Helpful, you try a mountain, then a single wave, then a carp. It all turns into something that looks a bit like a moody burrito. But here's the catch: no one judges. In fact, an elder glances over and mutters, "Ah, the hidden shape of transience. Sure, that's exactly what you were going for." Turns out fan painting wasn't just decorative. Samurai used fans to send silent signals during battle, deliver poetic flirtations, or hide a quick yawn during long sermons. Some carried Gunsen metal-ribbed war fans, while others preferred hyogi, formal wooden fans used in court ceremonies. Entire treatises were written on the language of the fan. Historians still debate whether fan gestures developed standardized meaning or were more like vague interpretive dance. But we do know that some fan designs were passed down through generations like family crests. Yours definitely a one-off. You carry it with you to your next destination, a viewing pavilion, where you sit with others to simply look at what clouds, birds, the reflection of bamboo in a pond. It's called mono no, aware the gentle sorrow of impermanence. It's less of an activity, more of a mood. Think of it as the Japanese version of doom scrolling, except with dragonflies and less existential dread. A monk beside you remarks, "That tree won't bloom again for another year." You nod as if this has unlocked something inside you. A hawk flies overhead, someone sighs, you all sip tea. Apparently, this entire afternoon has been about training your perception, making you better at reading the subtle cues of nature, of people of war. A samurai who cannot detect a lie in a smile or hear a hidden blade in a silence is just a guy with a sword and bad instincts. You spend a good hour watching a koi fish almost leap, and When it finally doesn't, you feel like you've truly learned patience. Later, you're brought to a tiny courtyard for a rare treat, a scent ceremony. Not to be confused with incense burning at temples, this is the samurai version of a fragrance duel. Tiny wooden boxes are passed around, each containing different aromatic woods. You close your eyes. The first smells like snow on iron. The second, plum blossoms buried in ash. The third, smoke and memory. The game is to identify the wood, but also more poetically to describe its effect on your soul. You offer, "This one reminds me of waiting." Everyone nods deeply. Someone weeps. Fun fringe fact incense smelling games called kodo were highly ritualized and often used in noble samurai circles. It wasn't uncommon for warriors to scent their armor before a battle, not for vanity, but to ensure that if they died, they would leave behind a pleasing trace. Historians still argue whether this was rooted in Buddhist philosophy or just very refined drama. Evening comes again, and you're invited to a final gathering, a soft, slow procession called the Lantern Walk. Each person lights a paper lantern painted earlier that week with their own symbol. Yours has a lopsided wave and maybe a burrito fish hybrid. Still, it glows beautifully. You walk single file through the pine trees' feet, brushing moss lanterns, swinging gently. No one speaks. It's as if your shadows are walking with you, old selves shed along the way. At a clearing, everyone sets their lantern down. Dozens of soft lights breathing in unison. One by one, they begin to dim them. A ritual to practice letting go. Your guide whispers, "This is how we remember what we must release." You pause, then snuff yours out. The dark isn't scary here. It's tender, like a cool blanket or the final note of a lullaby. Back in your room, the mat feels softer. You find your kite tucked in the corner. Your melon bird still kind of looks like a turtle. And your beetle, he's sleeping in a walnut shell full of glory and cucumber. Tomorrow is your last day. And while you haven't picked up a sword even once this week, you're fairly sure that if someone challenged you now, you'd offer them a poem instead, or at least a very meaningful wave of your fan. You rise early before the bell, before the birds, before even the faintest whiff of miso in the wind. It's still dark, but not unpleasantly so, just the sort of quiet that makes you feel like you're walking on the rim of the world, right before the sun decides whether it's worth showing up. Today's schedule, there isn't one. Instead, you're told you will walk the boundary. No context, just that. A simple instruction handed over with a bowl of sweet rice and pickled plum. Your guide is an older man with more eyebrow than facial expression. He wears sandals that have clearly seen a lot of boundary. You follow him. You loop around the edge of the estate, past stables, past streams, past a mossy wall where a frog is dramatically contemplating the meaning of dampness. You bow to a scarecrow. The scarecrow bows back, or maybe that was the wind. You walk in silence, the kind of silence that's too thoughtful to be awkward. Eventually, your guide gestures toward the hills in the distance and says, "The boundary is not always where the fence stands. Sometimes it's where you stop insisting things must stay the same." Well, that's cryptic, but also strangely comforting. Turns out this walk isn't about property lines. It's an old custom dating back to early samurai clans who'd walk their lands not to assert dominance, but to remember what they were protecting. Some scholars believe this ritual helped warriors recenter their moral compass, reminding them they weren't just sword swingers, but caretakers. Others think it was mostly a clever way to check for sneaky neighbor fences. You return with the sun now fully risen, lighting the roof tiles like rows of sleepy koi. Breakfast is waiting, grilled fish miso and a square of tamago that somehow tastes like a gentle apology. Afterward, you visit the armor room. It's quiet there like a museum where everything is just barely holding its breath. Each suit is posed like it's halfway through a decision. Some are polished, gold-edged, and proud. Others are plain and humble, clearly made for practical use. One looks like it could double as a small teapot collection. You're allowed to try on a sleeve, just the sleeve. Even that is enough to realize these things are not just decorative, they're commitment. The arm guard alone weighs more than your sense of direction, and it squeaks like an old floorboard when you move. You're shown a tiny compartment in the helmet. For a keepsake, your guide explains. A lock of hair or a folded prayer. Not exactly standard issue today, but deeply telling. Historians still argue whether these personalization details were widespread or reserved for elite samurai. What's clear is that armor wasn't just a uniform, it was autobiography. You step back and realize something odd. You've been here for days living like a samurai, and you haven't drawn a sword once. No duels, no shouting, no dramatic rain-soaked standoffs, and yet you feel changed. You return to the poetry wall where your first haiku still hangs curled slightly at the edges. You add a second verse. Beetle race is done. Lantern fades into the pine. I forgot my fan. Someone chuckles nearby. You bow. They bow back. Later, you're asked to pack your things, but there's not much. A half-painted fan, a walnut shell, a mind oddly quiet. Before you leave, there's one final ceremony. You and the other visitors gather in a circle, each given a small folded crane made of rice paper. Your host speaks not loudly, just clearly enough to be heard above the breeze. Every samurai must return to their world. But what you carry is not the sword. It's the stillness you found in the absence of needing one. You're invited to release the crane into the stream that runs behind the compound. Yours floats awkwardly at first, but then catches the current and glides around a stone like it knows exactly where it's going. You watch until it vanishes. Then it's time. You walk down the path you first arrived on, only now you notice the moss feels thicker, the wind softer. You hear someone laughing over melon carvings in the distance, and you, a person who once thought samurai just trained and sliced things on repeat, now know that on their days off they cooked, watched bugs, stared at clouds, and painted waves that looked like burritos. They practiced the art of noticing. They trained their minds as carefully as their blades. They learned how to be still, how to be kind, and how to find strength in silence. You cross the threshold, no fanfare, no gongs, just one last glance over your shoulder at the tiled rooftops and the faint echo of bamboo tapping in the wind. And just like that, your week as a samurai ends. But in some very sleepy corner of your soul, it never really will. So now as the last echo of lantern light fades from your mind, and the scent of distant pine clings gently to the back of your thoughts, I invite you to just rest. Let yourself imagine that moss underfoot, again cool and springy, soft as breath. Let the stream that carried your paper crane carry your worries too, slowly, gently, as if nothing needs rushing anymore. Because maybe that's the greatest lesson from these quiet samurai days, not the sword forms or the formal bows, but the way everything had its time, its season, its silence. A kite could rise only when the wind said yes. A poem could exist even if no one understood it. A beetle could be a champion for just 6 tiny inches, and you Wetsutstunum, you can just be here now, not chasing, not fixing, not fighting, just floating like that little paper crane, light enough to drift, quiet enough to dream. You've earned this stillness, so lie back. Feel the pillow beneath your head like the softness of rice straw. Let your breath slow like a fading gong. Let your muscles go slack like an empty kimono, folded away at the end of a long, peaceful day. And if your dreams happen to take you back to that compound to the fan you painted or the clouds you named, well, don't be surprised if Shingen the beetle wins this time.